welcome back to Everyone's Addicted. Today's guest, Adam, has graciously come on to share his experience and knowledge with addiction. So, welcome, Adam. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Um, yes, my name is Adam May. I am what am I? I'm a jack of all trades. Actively right now, I would say that the consulting is most prominent. I've been in clinical since 2009. I still operate to some degree as a clinical provider, more so as a clinical consultant. Um, but have been working in adolescent and adult diagnostics, severe mental health, and substance abuse and addiction. Like I said, since about 2009. My most what's so beneficial about the work that I do and everything that's a part of it is everything that I promote is from experience, not from education. The education is just for the legitimacy, but I've been doing this struggle since 17. Really, if you want to go further back, probably 13 is when it really began. And when I say it I would define as, problematic mental health, problematic identity, um, unsure of where I'm placed in the world. And so alcohol, easily became alcohol easily became, a resource, a tangible necessity for socialization, especially at an early and young age. If I didn't know how to socialize with people, so I just knew how to get drunk and have fun at parties, So that's where it kind of really started, as far as an abusive relationship with alcohol or an improper use of alcohol in that sense. And then come 17, more so 15, but legitimately at 17, I was diagnosed with Ewing sarcoma, which is an intraoscular bone cancer. And I was told I had a 25% chance of living. So from that point, I didn't really care, and I didn't see myself ever making it out of my teenage years.
I get it. So, you're
Um,
like, fuck it, right?
oh, exactly, exactly. There wasn't, and that was the thing about it. And I tell this with every interview that I'm a part of and everything that I do is that I was gifted the diagnosis of cancer. That's how I looked at it, because I was going to kill myself between 13 and 17, and then I was given a get out of jail free card, meaning I can now die naturally because that's what I want. And yes, it'll affect everybody around me, but it won't be because I killed myself. So
Mm-hmm.
if I weigh those out, this is actually a better outcome. Um, but then that's where all the, camaraderie and all the, wow, you're doing so good and blah, 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 blah. And almost like this facade of I have to now survive, because if I don't, I'm a failure in these people's eyes. And so then that created kind of a warped concept. And at that time, I wasn't drinking because obviously I was, you know, not really doing well health wise. So alcohol just, I was on enough propofol every 3 weeks that alcohol wasn't even going to touch anything. So, I mean, at that time, and thank God I'm still alive at 37 today,
I'm 37.
because oh, I love that. I am alive at 37 today because when they prescribed me methadone at 17 years old, because of the severity of pain that I had, it created more of a migraine, like almost a bullet migraine, um, from the adverse reactions to the opiates. So I wouldn't go as far as to say I'm allergic to opiates, but it makes me feel worse than whatever I took the opiate for. So I've got my methadone and I'm selling them for, um, 20 a bill of pop and making money. That's how I was
Oh,
making
yeah.
money at that age. So, uh, but then, all of a sudden I'm granted life and told you've made it into adulthood, go off and live. And so I kept myself, pretty oriented, I guess, in a sense of just going through the white Midwest checklist of get an education, buy a house, get married, and then, go from there. And I did those things. And The only thing that kept me sober during that period of time was my dedication. My addiction was to my education. My
Hmm.
addiction was to learning. I didn't have time to drink because I had a nose in a book. But the moment that I was done with my master's and the moment that I was no longer running like 90-hour weeks and I had, like 30 to 40 hours that I was obligated to, but outside of that, I didn't have to study. I didn't have to research. I didn't have to do shit. And I was bored and I didn't know what to do. So 23, 25 is kind of really, really where it took off. Drinking was fun then. Um, and
Everybody else
then
is doing it at that time too,
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. It was totally appropriate. You
everybody's
were
like, oh,
getting out of college, you were coming back to the areas,
mm,
and you were starting careers, and you actually had money that you could go play and drink with. I could go spend $130 at a bar on shitty food and a bunch of alcohol. But then
mm-hmm.
eventually it started to get to a logic standpoint because I'm frugal, regardless of however money I
So
ever
am
make in the
I.
world. So it got to a point where it's like, I'm spending this amount of money. I know how much that bottle of SoCo is. That's bullshit. That's $18. And you're charging me $6.50 a drink because I order a double. And
Hmm.
so if I'm doing the math on that, a double of that, so there's 27 shots in a bottle, blah, 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 blah. That's a ridiculous amount of money.
Well, I worked as
I'll
a
just get
bartender.
tap loaded.
I
Oh,
was
yeah, that's the
I worked
lucky.
as a bartender, so I was the same way, right? Where I was like, I knew the price opposed to, you know what I mean, what they're selling it for. Like a 9 ounce glass of wine is like $15 when the whole bottle itself is $15, right?
Right. And so
So
that's where I started to get preloaded
I used to
before
drink
going to a bar. But it
because
eventually got to a point to where the preloading wasn't, I was still drinking the same amount when I would go to the bar.
you know what I used to do? I used to take my really cheap ass solo bottle of wine. I lived in a small town, so I knew where to hide things. And I would hide my wine outside of the bar. So because I smoke, when I'd go and smoke, I would drink my wine and then go back in, and I would only
Yeah.
maybe have one drink because I had snuck my booze that was way cheaper and keep it outside.
Oh, for sure. And that's one of the things, especially in the work that I do now, and we'll definitely get there, but especially in the work that I do now, if you can help people like understand and recognize these like negative habits that they've developed to hide their addictions, you can actually like you can modify those into very productive behaviors.
Mm,
Because when I say I was drinking at my best, what I mean by that is I was able to consume the most amount of alcohol while maintaining every component of my life. I often tell people now that during my 20s, I operated more as a gatekeeper to hell than I ever did as a clinical provider because I stood there and I said, "You don't want to come back here. You don't. I'm telling you." And the majority of the beginnings of my career was do as I say, not as I do. It
mm,
was this vicarious caregiver, excuse me, type of thing to where I felt okay, even though my sobriety was at its worst. um, my mental health was at its worst. My productivity was at its worst. I'm 6 foot tall and a buck 80 on a good day. At that point in time, the last time I saw the scale was 313 pounds, and I could drink a fifth and a half a day and wake up early enough to get my little blow and go to work correctly so that I could go to my job. And here's the fun part. Guess what my professional career was called? I was the substance prevention specialist at a children's psychiatric hospital and residential program. So, why was I let go of my position? Oh, because I got a DUI. So, that was my kind of wake up call to, oh shit, I kind of need to, I'm not doing well.
mm-hmm,
um, I'm gonna lose everything that I've worked for that I didn't intentionally mean to get. Let's be yes, at 17, the reason why I became a clinical therapist was because I didn't like my therapist at the children's hospital. I very distinctly remember telling her to fuck off because she tried to make me imagine being on a beach. And then she said to me, "You think you can do my job better?" And I said, "Absolutely." And she said, "Then beat cancer and come back here and do it."
Well, you're similar to me because I had a counselor and she would ask me advice. And that's what would like make me angry because I'm like, you're supposed to be helping me. Why are you asking me advice on your own life? Like that's and it made me I went to school and I studied psychology because I wanted to understand myself because I same thing, I was a teenager and I she wasn't helping me understand myself.
Right.
Obviously, didn't go as far as you did because my alcoholism got in the way of that in school when I was younger, right? Like, so I didn't finish my school. I'm in school now to finish off school because I um didn't do very well because booze was number one, right?
Right. Right.
So school was number eight. So
On that list, yeah.
yeah, so I wasn't as driven at the younger age, right? To but I also didn't have the same factors you did. So I mean, we all obviously
Well,
in
and
high
that
school
was
were
that was a big one. And that was a that created a lot of struggle up until about 27. So I was pretty well inoculated from 15 to 27. And if it wasn't alcohol, it was propofol, gabapentin, all these other different prescriptive medications that I was using correctly, that I was never abusing, but would just, you know, gabapentin is notorious for creating like pretty much brain drunk. They call it GABA drunk, to where your brain almost operates like you're intoxicated with alcohol.
my
Your
sister-in-law
memory's
takes it.
gone. I mean, it's ridiculous. So, because um, I ended up writing a book that I published in December of last year, and people have always asked me, "Well, how long did it take for you to write a book?" And it's like, well, 6 months. I hard nosed it and dedicated 2-3 hours every day, and finally got it published and out. But this concept has been in my brain for 10 years, 15 years, if you want to go back even further. It goes back probably to when I was 19, when I beat cancer and said, I'm going to write a book one day. That used to be kind of a running joke about my life because of all of the stuff that would happen. It was like cancer diagnosis, sibling cancer diagnosis, DUI number one, threatening of clinical license because of a non-disclosure of a DUI to my supervisor at the time. Like there was all of these like things and challenges that easily would have, if not now, but if you go back probably 4 years ago, anytime when am I 37, 33, from 13 to 33, if I would have killed myself, everyone around me would have understood. There wouldn't have been any, there wouldn't have been any surprise. It would have been surprise, but it would have been a win, not an if,
Hmm.
because the history would have defined itself.
Yeah.
My
I
story would have been he fought hard for as long as he could. I distinctly remember telling a friend, no matter what, just know that I've always tried my hardest.
But that's why you were such an inspiration because I honestly had a friend, or sorry, a boyfriend that was 19. He was hit by a car, was clinically dead for a little while, lost a leg, and had catastrophic brain damage. So he struggled mentally for a long time. So everybody was just waiting on when he was gonna end his own suffering. And he eventually, I'd say about 3 years ago, did end his own suffering. But everybody understands that it's not like we almost feel happy for him because he's free
It's
of
almost like we get
all of
sent
that.
off on a shield. It's that warrior shield, and it's like that's not. I wouldn't have died valiantly if I took my own life. That you don't get to go out on a warrior's shield. And so getting
Yeah.
that postmortem praise is so counterproductive to the people around you because they miss what. they have to learn from what they witness. And then that's how we as people, especially if you're, from the Al-Anon experience, um, you have to understand, what are you doing that enables this person? I've never been on the street. I've never been homeless. I've never been truly at risk of like Maslow's bottom level
Yeah,
of food,
same.
water, shelter, because my parents have lived 4 miles away. My grandparents lived half a mile from them. My grandparents would never let me fall or falter.
My
Um,
dad was the same way. He passed, but by then I was okay to take care of myself. But he,
well, and
same
that's
thing.
thank God for my grandfather, because that's the only reasons why I was able to afford, the legal support to, manage some of the things that I had dealt with.
Same with me
Um,
with my father, so I totally understand that. And it's
and
it it keeps you from being homeless. It keeps like my dad paid for my lawyer when I had a DUI. My dad made sure I had food. My dad made sure I had shelter. Like he didn't let me fall, even though I could have
sure.
easily been
And
on the
that's
streets.
oh right, and that's part of the, especially when I, because again, this is almost, yeah, year 16 of working with not only individuals of substance abuse, but the families and the siblings and children of abusers. And a lot of it is, I don't know how many times I've said this to people. Um, if that was your neighbor, what would you do? And that stops them dead, because without hesitation, they would always say, call the police. And I say, then what difference is this? Well, they're my son. I don't give a shit about that. That's not my son. Do you want me to call the police?
Yeah.
Like, how do you want to do that? Because we can have a conversation about what a mandated reporter is if you want to go that far. But just because he's running wild and not a present risk to himself or others, just makes stupid decisions. Like, at what point are you going to cut him off? And do I wish my parents or my grandparents would have done that? Um, there are some moments where I wish that, but I know that me wishing that is because I wanted to fail just to be able to say, okay, now I have a real reason to go. Part of the biggest struggle that I dealt with by beating can I don't want to say beating cancer, I'm still alive. Um, so I got a Make-A-Wish trip to go to Australia. So I went to the Great Barrier Reef in Australia, went snorkeling, stayed on a private island with like a
That is
chef
so
and a
cool.
guide. And I beat cancer. There's nothing I can do that would top either of those two items. Um, and that was a big struggle for the majority of, like I said, my 20s, where I'm just like, what am I supposed to do from here? Nothing I do from here will be valuable enough or worthy enough to be even compare to that.
And
That's
you
the false narrative that I said to myself for that
also
long.
didn't prepare because you didn't think you were going to
No, I
be.
wasn't supposed to be alive.
Yeah, so you didn't prepare yourself. Like, do you know what I mean? Like a regular
Vegas had
person
better
would
odds than
plan
I
their
did.
life out, but
Oh,
you
for sure.
didn't
That was
necessarily.
not in the cards, and that's even been part of the struggle. Because again, at 17, I lost the ability to have kids. So not only did I not foresee myself going into anything past teenage years, but even beyond teenage years, when I actually get into my 20s, my marriage probably ended because we met all the milestones. Having children wasn't in the cards.
Mhm.
I couldn't do it. I mean, I had a stored sample, but I wasn't financially in a position. My sobriety was not present. And it got to a point where my partner and I at the time, we just realized like we were better roommates and better drinking buddies on the weekend than we were like actual relationship partners. And
That's like
because
my
she
daughter's
couldn't
father and
see
I,
a
so I get it.
future, right, right. She couldn't, because she couldn't see a future, or couldn't see the value of going through the financial expenses of in utero, because you're talking 30, $40,000 out of
Oh yeah.
pocket. So that type of stress and the risk of me having substance problems while she's struggling with, this, that, it just, none of it mapped out.
Mm.
But it probably was the best thing that could have happened, because when she walked out and when she left, like month or two later, I just decided I'm going to stop drinking for 30 days. I've been reading articles and I know that I can get my metabolic system, back after about 3 weeks without alcohol in it. So I'm going to walk a little bit and then I'll just see what happens in 30 days. 30 days was 8.5 years ago.
Stop.
So it kind of became, this thing, where all of a sudden now is like, okay, well, what else can I do? And then that's when the weight started to come off. And then after that, it was okay, now what else can I do? I got sober in January of 2017. I filed for my own LLC in June of 2017. My addiction previously was my education. My addiction then became alcohol. My addiction then became my career. Now I am solely responsible for what I do. I don't work for I've not worked for anyone since 2017. I will not work for anyone ever again. I will work with you. You
Hmm.
can 1099 private contract me until the cows come home, and I'll dedicate you decades. But how I operate and how I manage and control my life is under my own direction and accord. If I
I
don't want
also
to do that, I don't.
I also think because of basically all of the things that have happened to you, you have a unique perspective and a unique way of being a counselor and stuff, right? I also think people who have experience with addiction are much better at helping people in
But it's
addiction
actually
get better.
that's actually one of the requirements for one of the lower tier substance counselors. And I forget the actual title, but it one of the requirements is previous experience or struggle.
Because you also have the mental health aspect with like almost passing away and all of those things. And so I think like if you couldn't really work for somebody else because they could never ever understand you. So how would you work for them? You know what I mean?
Right. And part of the transition from clinical, like solely clinical, into consulting was that kind of component of, I don't want people to call me when they only feel like they have a diagnosis. I don't want to be mandated by insurance providers to have to submit within 30 days what your actual issues are. Here's the fun part. You can't do that. Literally, in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, version 5, every fucking diagnosis in that book says at the bottom, if the individual is struggling with substance abuse for 6 months or more, individual requires sobriety of 6 months. You cannot clearly diagnose somebody with a mental health condition if they are actively abusing substances. There is so much discrepancy about what is actually going on with that person that you cannot. It's not ethical and it's not correct, yet we do it every day.
Hmm.
You have a substance abuse problem, depression, and anxiety. Are you sure I don't have anxiety and depression because I'm withdrawing from alcohol? Well, possibly. If you stop using
Well,
alcohol, it could
good.
get better.
When you withdraw from alcohol, your anxiety is like through the
It
roof.
legitimately is a, there's a misfiring of things in the brain.
Statements
I
coming
was
off.
talking to one of my patients the other day, and he's like, why how come my brain gets so hooked on coke? Like, why do I want it so bad? And then why do I get so depressed when I'm off of it?
Oh, dopamine.
Exactly. And I said, because the coke goes in your brain, it goes in your brain, and it says, hey, I can do your job better. And I'm going to for a little bit. So you just chill out. You don't have to do anything. But the problem with it is that the coke bounces and forgets to tell the brain, hey, wake back up again and go back to work because I'm out. So then your brain doesn't wake up. So now you're not naturally producing. So the only way to get your dopamine back is to get your coke back. And insert here, it's not exclusive to coke.
No, it's not because I
And,
had that
and
issue with benzodiazepines. They also stop your brain from producing dopamine. So,
not just substance though. It goes even further into that. You look at like what the police, in the vice category, like all of those are activators of that dopamine, problem. And the thing about it is that there has been issues with me just be, at 27 I got sober, but at 33 I got well. And
uh-huh.
that was what helped me a lot, was the fact that I realized like this has never been an alcohol problem. It never was. It never was a substance abuse problem. It was a problem of me lacking the ability to manage my own mental health. And
Mm-hmm.
alcohol made it easier. I didn't have to think, I didn't have to feel, I didn't have to do much of anything. I had to amend relationships and apologize for stuff and fix broken things. But I became really skillful at changing tires. I became really skillful at changing side mirrors. I became really skillful about fixing drywall. Um, I became really intuitive about how to purchase things. I didn't have to buy brand new stuff because when I threw the vacuum at my wife, that broke. So I had to buy a new one for that. But at that age, I didn't have the money to spend $140 on a vacuum. So that's where like Facebook Marketplace and stuff like that, so really just kind of becoming skillful and kind of, intuitive and in figuring out just kind of how to operate in the world, and that's where I'm kind of saying like those skills are actually necessary and beneficial. They were being used not
Negatively.
productively, but I've met very dangerous people and very, very criminals. Criminals are some of the most intelligent populations I've ever,
Oh yeah.
interacted because you have to be.
Yep.
Dumb criminals don't survive.
Don't last. They end up in jail like that.
Oh, exactly. And so that's, being able to kind of hone in onto those individual skills, not just in myself, but in others as well. The whole point of the book was it is a collection of what I did, how I got myself to a position to where I could actually ask for help. One of the arresting officers from my second DUI, which resulted in uh, it was an escalated issue that resulted in a DUI and not following a lawful order and one maybe like one other little misdemeanor thing just to throw on there. Um, and I I was very embarrassed about that situation and experience, and I ended up emailing one. I had a card in my pocket when I woke up, in the tank the next day.
Mm.
Um, and it had an email on it, and I sent an email and I just said, can you please forward this to all parties involved? um, that email is the preface of my book, because that one of those officers, I started my little Instagram, which is instagram.com adam.may.motivates. And this guy sent me a direct message and he said, "Man, you've really come a long way. It's really awesome to see you come this far. I remember interacting with you, blah blah blah." Um, didn't identify himself as a police officer. Didn't identify him as anything other than that. He may not have even said, "I remember interacting with you," but he said enough where it's kind of like, "Okay, you know
Mm-hmm.
something that you're not supposed to. So how do you know?" And he said, "I was one of the officers involved." Um, and I said, "Oh, wow, thank you for reaching out and thank you for telling me that." And then out of nowhere, he goes, "I still got your email." I said, "What email are you talking about?" Because mind you, this was 2015, 2000, somewhere between 2013 and 2015 is when
Yeah.
that event occurred. He goes, "No, yeah, I still got it." And he ended up getting it over to me. And that was kind of, I had been the book, the clinical components of the book were done.
Yeah.
And I was kind of mulling over, do I want to incorporate me into the book, or is this just a strictly second perspective workbook, for you? And then that's where I kind of made, an executive decision to where it's spoken to you about me.
Yeah.
I'm the fox in the bear trap. I'm the one that will chew off my own limb before I receive help because I don't know if the hunter is there to help me or harm me. And I don't really want to find out.
But it also
I
makes your book more believable. Like, so yes, people read about clinical things, but when you're using your own experience, it makes it more relatable and it makes it more like believable. Do you know what I mean by that?
Yes, yeah, and that's part of, I'm not I can't I'm in this unique position to where I can't like position myself as a motivator and say do these things and you'll become like me because like me, there's like me doesn't exist.
Hmm.
I'm fatherless at 37. I work too many jobs. So what all do I do? I still maintain a clinical. I don't publicly identify as a therapist any longer. I strictly identify as a consultant.
Hmm.
Now, the consultancy is both for clinical and for strategy. So the strategy component is like just strictly business stuff. So, for instance, one of my clients on the consulting firm is Sheath Underwear, greatest underwear company in the world. Sheath.com, check them out. On the other side of it, I've got like a nonprofit kids or pediatric nonprofit site, clinical mental health resource in Kansas City. So that one gets, both because it's the clinical and the business strategy for launching a nonprofit in the midst of all the defunding, which unfortunately has caused a stalemate. I still maintain a clinical caseload. I've got clients that I've worked with for 7 or 8 years now. And I've also got clients that I've started working with in the last 30 to 60 days. Um, I also am the director of patient services for a stem cell clinic down in Puerto Vallarta, Mexico. So Renew Medical Center. I was just living in Mexico for the last 3 years, and I now live back in Kansas City area. Um, I've written the book, and I've actively got my own podcast. Defying Despair is the name of it. I've only got one
What
episode right now.
what
What's that?
platform is it on?
It's on all platforms.
Oh, okay.
It may I'm
So
pretty
you
sure I'm
use an
using
RSS thing that sends it out to like all the different ones.
yes.
Yeah,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah,
I
yeah.
use
And I've
that.
got a switchboard and I'm just trying to remember if Apple's on there because I know Apple was pending and there was something else I was supposed to do and I don't know if I did it
What you
because I'm
have to do
anti-Apple.
with Apple, basically you have to send in your RSS and
Right,
and then they have to look at it and
right.
then they give you an RSS that you have to put
Of there.
into
Right.
that program that you're using and then that's how it gets uploaded to Apple.
Right. Okay.
Just
Yeah.
so
I
you
think I'm
know.
using like Sprout something. And I've not, and I've been negligent about the podcast because I've been finishing out the book. Now
Mhm.
that the book's done and now that I've relocated back here to Kansas City, I've now got my little, hub, but I've also moved into a community that for some reason has an on-site podcast studio. So that's
Lucky.
pretty cool.
I wish.
All I have to do is take down a computer in the program and then be able to do that. So again, what I've created in my life has created me absolute and total freedom to do what I want, how I want for the people that I want to be involved with. And it's not pigeonholing me into, oh, you have to have a substance abuse for me to be able to help you, or oh, you have to have a diagnosable mental health condition for me to be able to help you.
Which
Oh,
is
it's this,
great.
oh, it's that. No, I want to be able to tell me what you need. And if I can't do it, I have a resource that I can bring in to be able to assist you and help you for that.
That's what I
Um,
do. I have a homeless resource program where I have brochures that have every possible resource in our community for showers, food,
mhm.
clothing, medical identification, like basically anything you can think of, right? And I have the days, the hours, the location, the phone number. And so if somebody comes into the clinic, or I there's a nonprofit that serves food on Fridays in the park, right? So
Right,
places like that, I'll go and I'll put them so the homeless can have that resource, so that anything that they need, they just open it up and they can find it without having, because they don't have, I don't know, like a lot of them don't have phones or internet or
right,
anything like that. So
right.
if they, and people don't like to ask for help.
No,
So
that's why I wrote a
they
book about it.
yeah, so they don't, they can just look at the paper instead of having to ask for help to find these things. They can
Right,
just look at it, they can find it themselves and then go forth and do that, right? And I think that's very important because people really don't like to ask for help. And there is a lot more resources than what you would know unless
right.
you had that
If you and
opportunity.
that's part of the difficulty is that most individuals do not learn about the resources until they need them, which if they need them it's too late. And so yeah, to really hit on the nail that you just planted, um I wrote that book because I didn't know how to ask for help. I knew how to apologize, but I didn't know how to ask for help. I wrote an email that apologized, but it didn't actually ask for help.
I'm the same way. I apologize. Like I was in an abusive relationship, so I have apology. I apologize all the time. But I never ask for help. I just, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. But I
Right,
never
because that's easier.
say I need help. I'm sorry. But the reason I'm sorry is because I did something that I need help for.
Right. And so what I've created is, 10 chapters that constructively kind of go in order. And not only will I get you the information, but I'd love to just send you, about 10 copies for you to send off to, people in the community or population who may not even be able to afford a copy. Because I want it to become one of those shelf references that anyone can
Mm.
pull and be able to just thumb through a chat. You don't have to read chapter one to be able to do chapter seven.
And
If
it's
you
not like
feel
the
like
12
you're at a point
steps.
where you need to understand more about Maslow's hierarchy and its risk, if I have troubles in levels one, two, and three, I'm never going to have personal identity or um, actual reason or purpose. Like, and
Even
self-actualization is supposed to be the peak of Maslow's hierarchy, and probably I'd say 70 to 80% of the population dies without ever realizing who they actually are and what their reason or purpose is for being here.
that was what my addiction was. I didn't know what I was supposed to do. I kept going to school for different things because I couldn't figure out where I fit into this world. And that's exactly it. And even like with like the labeling theory, right? So like these homeless people, they're just constantly labeled as like no good or lazy or whatever. So they start believing that about themselves, which then in turn makes them never reach out for help, right?
Right.
And it's the same as the other one. I can't remember. I think it's Karl Marx, where it's like if you don't feel like you're part of a community,
Right.
you are going to end up not feeling like you're included, and you're going to go out and do negative things because you don't
Right.
feel part of anything, right?
Exactly. So the guy that lives out in the woods by himself lives out in the woods by himself because nobody in the community wants him there. But everyone in the community says, well, that guy's just weird because he lives out in the woods by himself. And it's
Hmm.
like you're creating the narrative that you're making for this person. um and that's one of the most fulfilling things that I've experienced in my professional career is my ability to work with anybody. When I used to own a psychiatric practice back in Kansas City. I'm in Kansas City now. I've only been here for a week and a half, so I've got to remember that I now live back here. So here in Kansas City, I used to own a psychiatric practice, and the most fulfilling part of it was I just to just be able to have like a multifaceted resource. Not only were we able to provide like weekly or even monthly clinical check-ins, but I also operated like an intense outpatient program, dual diagnosis, women's DBT, and then just general mental health. Um, and working with that population at that time when I was actually sober, not necessarily well, but sober,
Hmm.
um, was just as fulfilling as the previous years when working in the adolescent programs, but it started to actually mean more. And I started to kind of recognize more to where it was almost like this. I would speak and three people would listen, and then I would turn and three people would follow. And then four people would turn and then four people would speak, and then that's how it's supposed to network and evolve. And that's how you
Hmm.
create, a contagion of sobriety, you
That's why I
know,
don't think you could ever work for somebody else because you have so much of your own really, really good methods that I feel like you can't be contained by somebody else's rules and stuff,
right. So what do you do with that? So that's where it was like, well, I'll just be oppositional and work by myself for the rest of my life. And that wasn't fulfilling enough. And Socrates and Aristotle talk about the highest form of learning is teaching. I
Hmm.
survived. So when I got to 33, I finally started to figure out. Um, I started to put the pieces together. I will admittedly say that it was strongly assisted by the therapeutic use of psilocybin during that period of time, but it it helped me navigate my brain space in a way that I needed to do for the last 30 years. I mean, I still to this day say that year that I spent in Colorado, it gave me the ability to finally write an email to my mom that I should have written 30 years ago. And to be able to get to that position in place helped me get into personal identity and self-actualization of I have done this so much for others and I've done it successfully and well that I now have to do this for myself. So the intention of Colorado 4 years ago was to finish the book. But then I was trying to write the book, realizing like I'm not adequate enough as an author to be saying these things.
Hmm.
I cannot produce a book about do as I say, not as I do. There were struggles when I was in clinical practice where I would be administering a major depressive inventory to a client sitting on the couch who has paid to be there for clinical service. And I'm answering the same questions in my head, and my score's lower. So that's
I
weird.
know that probably didn't feel great.
No, and it really made me feel inadequate, and it made me feel like I was doing a disservice to the people that I
Mhm.
operated for and with. And and I've never, and the thing about it is that substance regression has never been. I'm never going to drink again. Not because I'm telling myself I can't. I could, and I could probably manage it pretty well, but I have no desire to.
Oh, the hangover is not worth it. And
No,
the anxiety, the apologies, the whole
right.
shebang. It is
And knowing
not
and
worth
knowing
it.
how my sober brain operates versus how my drunk brain operates, it's easy for me to be able to answer, well, why didn't you do this sooner? Because I couldn't.
And
Well,
like
how come
we
you
don't
couldn't?
understand that about ourselves until we see do you know what I mean? Like until you see,
Hindsight is 2020.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's the best way to say it. Hindsight is 2020. Sorry, I had to plug my phone or my
Uh,
it. Hindsight's 2020, so like you don't always know until
Well, and the
you
biggest, right,
experience.
the biggest struggle that people run into is that when that hindsight comes into play, that's 90% of the relapse. When they get into the sober mind and realize, like, oh shit, alcohol is not the problem. I don't know how to manage my feelings and emotions.
Mhm.
That's oftentimes, unfortunately, if four people are sitting in a room, only one of them's going to be able to maintain sobriety for life. And so when you find out those numbers, when you know that 25%, I mean, and I'm fine with that. Tell me I'm 1% and I'll still do it. I mean, you told me I had 25% chance of living. So if I got 25% chance of sobriety, then I'm still alive, so I can still be sober.
I know
Like,
somebody
I know
did
what
tell
those
me
numbers
that.
mean. I know I can break those numbers, but every other person out there doesn't. They
Hmm.
hear only 60% are going to be successful. And they're like, that's not good enough. It's got to be
Oh,
90 to
oh, well, then
100.
that's my excuse to use because oh, so many
Right.
out of the
I'm
gate.
not one. I don't, I don't want to waste a sober life. I've heard that. I've heard that from people who are sitting in group clinical therapies,
Yeah,
extended
I have
programs, and
to.
said, I'm not deserving enough of sobriety. It should be one of these people.
I've heard a lot. Like I've heard so many different things from that. Like in that exact same like attitude, or people will. So many people like to be the victim mentality, or as some people call it, the pity party, where it's like, well, I'm not going to be successful because I have
Right.
all these external factors that are going to make me fail. When
Right.
I'm the type of person that I'm like, I'm not going to fail because I refuse to fail. But other
But
people
that's, I
don't
want
think
you to be
that way.
really careful. I want you to be really, really careful with that. And I think you're saying it correctly, because failing means that you've given up or stopped trying. I often tell people are like, well, how'd you get successful? And it's because I'm willing to take more risk and find more opportunities to fail than most people are willing to try.
Hmm.
That's the difference.
I
Because
have
I've
done
shaken
so
hands with
many.
many faces of death and I have no discomfort with that. I don't want to die, but I'm not, I, it wouldn't be the end of the world if I did. And that's where I've said to myself, especially as I'm getting like older, and I was told, like a month ago, I got high cholesterol, and I was like, that's a normal people thing. What is that?
For you.
And she's like, yeah, you're getting to an age where you got to be mindful about, fatty foods and fried foods and cheeses and everything like that. I'm like, is this related to the cancer? No. I was like, is this related to me living in Mexico for 3 years and eating tacos? And they say, yeah. I was like, well, that's messed up. So now I have to like make life choices that don't have anything to do with a mental health, or it's just like it's a real normal thing. And
Hmm.
that's such a unique experience because for the last 20 years, it has been life altering. And I don't necessarily mean like from a health condition, but I mean from like a legal standpoint, from a professional standpoint, from a health standpoint. Every experience that I have has been life altering. Now, mind you, they've thankfully gone in the correct direction because of my ability to take ownership, my ability to accept consequence. If I know I did something, I will 100% take fault and
Hmm.
take whatever punishment it is. But just enable me the ability to show, that I can do better or I can make change. That's always the biggest struggle, is that people with substance abuse problems or even mental health problems, they have the skills and they have the ability. They just don't have the accountability. And
Hmm.
if they can't do it, somebody else has to. And so with the book, especially like in the first chapter at the very end of it, its workbook section is like a recording tool that you pretty much should do about every 2 to 3 days, so that you have a tangible record of what your feelings and moods are actually. People get into so much disparity between, I have to be happy, and they don't actually understand like the spectrum of emotions. Inside Out movies have done so phenomenally well
My
with
kids
like
love
dumbing down,
movies.
laymansing mental health to help us understand, like, wait a minute, you can have depressive thoughts or feelings about happy events. Like, that doesn't compute. And it's
Hmm.
like, well, those are dual associated memories. And that's Inside Out, movie one. Inside Out movie two is, the introduction of adolescence and actually
Anxiety.
developing like problematic emotions if they're not managed or directed well.
And they do a really good way of explaining it when she hurt her friend by accident, and
Right,
they like she's taking accountability because it shows that she feels bad for what she's done,
right.
and it shows that. And I love that at a younger age they have, my kids watch it over and over again, they have that tool of learning that, because we didn't have that as kids. As kids it
Oh,
was just
exactly.
this and that, black and white,
Right.
that's it,
And
right?
we
So
were given, we were given the after school specials that had all of the real world events and stuff like that, but
that wrapped up in
none
a
of them
happy
were ever
bow.
like exactly, they were done at the end. You look at like Boy Meets World and it's like this stuff should carry over for more
Hmm.
than one episode.
Oh yeah.
Um, and that's life doesn't exist like that. The reason why I was able to get my mind right at 33 was because I was able to actually look back at the previous 30 years and separate them into 10-year intervals and actually start laying them on top of each other. Kind of doing one of those things, where you like look at it in the light and you say, okay, what lines up and what doesn't? How come I'm still carrying over patterns from my early single digit years into my 30s? For
Hmm.
what reason am I doing that? Oh, it's an emotional stunting and this because I've had a traumatic experience at this age. My EQ and IQ were out of whack for a very long time. Because up until 33, I was still operating at an emotional age of about a 17-year-old, because that's when I was diagnosed with cancer. If you really set me off, I went back even further to 13, 14.
When you first
Um,
started doing like they always say like the first time, say you smoked weed. So for me, like 13, they would say that that's where I would have been stunted until I started working on myself, because
right,
it just went into more drug usage and not like really learning how to cope,
right,
instead I was just numbing because I was bullied, so why not, numb myself so I don't have to deal with it. That was
right.
more the trauma and all that kind of stuff. I just don't need to get into it per se, but I'm saying like for me, I was about 30 years old when I learned I have a really good addictions doctor, and
Mhm.
she I've always been very good at like holding myself accountable and apologizing and accepting that I did that. But I don't know how to place barriers a lot of the time. So I'll
Right.
go to my addictions doctor and I'll talk to her. And then the next week I'll come in and she'll be like, well, did you set that barrier? And I'll be like,
Kind of didn't
no.
you?
And then she'll be like, well, then you can't complain to me about
Yeah,
this because you
didn't do
know,
that.
it's your
Right.
fault.
Yeah.
Right? And I'm like,
Yeah,
yeah,
and
I
that's
know.
and that's when you learn effective ownership, like that's what really starts to evolve, the progress that you're making in life and kind of the directions, that it goes. So I do have to be mindful of a 10 a.m. patient that I have. I'm on Central Time. So I
That's
definitely wanted
fine.
to make sure, like I said, I own and operate a consulting firm that's international. That's www.askadamconsulting.com. The podcast, I'll send you the link for Defying Despair. I've got one episode, but I'm going to start dedicating more energy and time into those episodes. The intention of the podcast is to bring on interviewees to discuss how they have uh, I guess, done what I've done, in the same sense of having, the biggest adverse struggles ever, and then being able to warp that into something successful, whether it be an independent business, a book, a podcast, something to help. My responsibility, especially with establishing a new platform, is to help others begin establishing new platforms as well. It's part of that networking. I don't have the ability to create a legacy through child or through name, so I've got to, if my legacy is a book on a shelf sitting next to a James
You
Allen book
could.
or sitting next
You
to,
can't say that you'll never have a child. 10
that's
years from now,
accurate.
you could find a woman that would like, and you could afford to do it, so you could still have that legacy. You just Don't know
Yeah,
yet.
that's accurate. That's accurate. Right now it's I've got a 12-year-old right now that takes my main priorities. He's a 40-pound French bulldog that's asleep on the couch back here. So I've got a kid. So I'm good on that front. But I've also got two more books. You know, the Fox and a Bear Trap, a book on how to ask for help, is book one of a three-part series. So by the end of 25, I'll have published, uh, what are we calling it? It's going to be about my time in Colorado, and it's going to be a book on how to heal or hope. I got to figure out what order. There's three books, like I said. So I'm still kind of in the organization phases. The initial book is How to Ask for Help, which is giving you the ability to not only figure out how to articulate to who and about what, but also to get yourself into a position to where you don't necessarily need or require the help. You're just seeking it for additional supports to enhance the progress that you
Mhm.
are actively making on your own. And if that means that, like I said, if I send you 10 copies and then you hand a copy off to a person, the hope and intention is that they can operate that book well enough without the assistance of a clinical provider, therapist, or anything else, and be able to gain some successes from it. Now, do I do intense, integrative book work, meaning you and I can essentially work together for 10 weeks and go through each chapter and process each of the, assignments and everything else, not only for the stabilization of sobriety, but the stabilization of mental health and the advancement of what do you want to do with your life when you grow up? Like, and I love asking like 30, 40, and 50-year-old people, like, what do you want to be when you grow up? And they'll flat out tell you a completely different answer than whatever it is they've ever done in their career thus far.
Mhm.
Because they've been so, I've worked at Ford for 25 years because that's just what I did. It's like, well, what do you actually want to do? Oh, I want to be a farmhand. I'd love to have 100 head of cattle on 100, 100 acres. Okay, well, how do you get to that point? I don't know. My uncle has it, but I've had so many struggles with him, and he paid me out on a bunch of stuff, and the
That's joy.
relationship's just not good. And it's just like, well, then let's figure out how do we reestablish how do we get you to that position? And that's the part that is now I don't want to say my responsibility, but I don't feel obligated to it, but I feel like it's a disservice if I don't.
Get
So
it.
like I said, I will get you all the links and all the information. I would love for us to do a second up episode, a follow-up
Absolutely.
episode. So, let me know when, where, and how. And it'd be really good to enhance, this network as well. And be able to do that. So I appreciate the time and I appreciate conversation, and we'll follow up later today, and do some of those exchanges. And then that way you have the information to publish and post.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I have learned a lot, and you are an incredible, um, I can't even think of the word because it's just you're a survivor, but you're not somebody who's like, oh, I went through all this, and no,
It
you're
was a
a real,
Tuesday for me.
yeah, you're
So,
not a pity party, you're not any of that. You're somebody that you can learn from. You're a real person, you're humble, you're not somebody who has any victim
well,
mentality.
yes, I'm very humble. I will say that. But the one I will say, and what makes me different from most clinical providers, I have an MS. I don't have an MA. So
Yeah.
mine is science based. I need numbers. I need tangible stuff. I'm not here to make you feel good. I'm here to make you better.
Mm,
It's either fuck off or get on.
that's what
And
my doctor's
that's
like, and that's what
exactly.
helps. You can't baby people through sobriety
No.
or through mental health. You can't do it. It will
Oh
not
no,
work.
no. I cannot coddle. I have it in me, but only
Can't
for
do it.
certain people, which is this 12-year-old little fat dog on the couch and my parents.
Well,
Um,
thank you. I know you have something to do, so I won't keep you up any or keep you held up anymore.
yeah, I'll make sure the next time that we have a connect for episode two, I will make sure that we have hour and a half, 2 hours, because I know we could go on and on and on, which I think would be great. So I'll circle back with you, and then we'll keep going from there. So thank you again for having me, And again, I hope everyone checks out the book, the website, the Instagram, whatever. Connect with me somehow, email, phone, text, however, and I'm always available. So thank you again.
All all that information will be in the show notes, just so everybody knows. And thank you so much. I appreciate you coming on and sharing your incredible story. And yeah, we will catch up soon. Thank you so much.
All righty, bye.
Bye.